Tell me about a time you had to compromise. Introduction. This is a common behavioral interview question for software developers, backend developers, full-stack developers, senior developers, and team leads. Interviewers ask this question to understand, whether you can balance different priorities, whether you can work with people who have different opinions, how you handle trade-offs, whether you can protect quality while still supporting delivery, how you communicate when everything cannot be done perfectly, whether you can adjust your approach without losing. The main goal, check. Whether you value team success over being right. This question is especially important for Java developers, backend developers, Spring Boot developers, full-stack developers, junior software developers, senior software developers, team leads, Agile teams. The best way to answer this question is by using the STAR method. STAR means S, situation. Explain the background. T, task, explain your responsibility. A, action. Explain what you personally did. R, result, explain the final outcome. A good interview answer usually spends 10% situation, 10% task, 60% action, 20% result. The most important part is the action section, because interviewers want to understand how you evaluated options, listened to others, made a practical compromise, and still delivered value. Question: tell me about a time you had to compromise. Example 1. Compromising on API scope for a sprint situation. In one sprint, our team was building a customer search API using Spring Boot. The product owner wanted advanced filters, sorting, pagination, export functionality, and role-based access in the first release. The timeline was tight, and implementing everything in one sprint would create quality and testing risk. Task: I needed to help the team find a compromise that delivered business value without rushing an unsafe implementation. Action: I first reviewed the full scope with the product owner, QA, and front-end developer. The requested features included customer name, search, status filter, date filter, sorting, pagination, export, role-based access, validation, error handling. I explained that the core search API, pagination, sorting, validation, and authorization were important for the first release. However, export functionality and advanced filters required more testing and could increase risk. Instead of simply pushing back, I proposed a phased compromise. The first release would include check, basic search, check, status filter, pagination, sorting, role-based access, validation, error responses. The second release would include export functionality, advanced filters, additional formatting, larger report-style data handling. I also documented the future items so they were not forgotten. Result: the product owner agreed to split the scope. The first version was delivered on time with good quality. The business received a usable search feature, and the remaining enhancements were planned for the next sprint. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows scope compromise, business value focus, quality protection, stakeholder communication, phased delivery. Example 2. Compromising between quick fix and proper refactor situation. In one production support case, users were getting errors from a backend API when an optional field was missing. The immediate pressure was to fix the issue quickly. At the same time, I noticed that the related validation logic was duplicated in several places. Task: I needed to fix the production issue quickly while avoiding a large risky refactor during an urgent situation. Action: I first focused on the urgent production issue. I reproduced the problem using logs, correlation IDs, and the affected request payload. The root cause was missing null safe handling for one optional field. I wanted to clean up the duplicated validation logic, but I also understood that a production hotfix was not the right time for a large refactor. So I compromised. For the hotfix, I made a focused change. Add null safe handling. Update validation logic only in the affected area. Add regression test for missing optional field. Add test for optional field present. Avoid unrelated cleanup. Keep deployment risk low. Then, I created a follow-up technical debt task for the broader validation refactor. I explained this approach to the team and QA. Result: the production issue was fixed quickly and safely. The hotfix stayed small and easy to review. The larger refactor was not ignored. It was tracked separately for a safer future sprint. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows curling approval, compromise between speed and quality, technical debt awareness, safe hotfix approach, follow-up planning, risk control. Example 3. Compromising on front-end and back-end API response format situation. In one full-stack feature, the front-end team wanted a flattened API response because it was easier to display in the UI. The back-end team preferred a nested response because it matched the domain model more closely. Both approaches had valid reasons, but the disagreement was slowing integration. Task: I needed to help find a compromise that supported front-end needs without making the back-end difficult to maintain. Action: I first listened to both sides. The front-end team wanted, easier table rendering, fewer nested object checks, faster UI integration, simpler mapping logic. The back-end team wanted clean domain consistency, reusable DTO structure, clean service mapping, avoid exposing database structure. I suggested a compromise. We would not expose the database entity directly. Instead, we would create a screen-specific response DTO. The DTO would flatten fields needed by the UI, hide unnecessary backend structure, keep internal domain models separate, avoid leaking database entities, provide clear sample JSON, support QA testing. I created a sample response and reviewed it with both teams. Result: both front-end and back-end teams agreed. Front-end integration became easier. Back-end maintainability was protected because the internal model remained separate from the API response. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows cross-functional compromise, API design maturity, front-end empathy, back-end maintainability, DTO design, team alignment. Example 4. Compromising on deployment timing situation. In one release, a backend change was ready late in the day. The business wanted the feature released as soon as possible because it had already been delayed. However, QA and DevOps were concerned that deploying late could be risky because support coverage would be limited. Task: I needed to help the team compromise between urgency and production safety. Action: I reviewed the situation with the release team. The urgency was valid because the business wanted the feature available quickly. But the risk was also real. The change touched shared validation logic, multiple APIs, role-based behavior, smoke testing, monitoring, rollback readiness. I suggested a compromise. Instead of deploying late in the day, we would deploy the next morning. But we would use the extra time productively. Before deployment, we prepared copy, smoke test checklist, rollback plan, affected API list, monitoring checks, QA validation scenarios, support communication notes. This compromise avoided an unnecessary after-hours risk while keeping the delay small. Result: the deployment happened the next morning. QA, DevOps, developers, and support were available. The release went smoothly, and the business received the feature with lower production risk. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows check, release judgment, business urgency awareness, production safety, practical compromise, DevOps and QA collaboration. Example 5. Compromising on refactoring scope situation. In one sprint, I worked on a feature inside a large service class. The class had validation, business logic, mapping, repository calls, and external service calls all mixed together. I initially wanted to refactor the whole class because it was difficult to maintain. Task: I needed to improve the code while still delivering the sprint feature on time. Action. During review, the team agreed the class needed cleanup, but they were concerned that a full refactor would be too risky. The risks included cup large, pull request, cup harder review, cup more regression testing, cup impact on unrelated flows, cup longer QA cycle, cup higher chance of introducing bugs. I compromised by doing an incremental refactor. For the current story, I refactored only the area touched by the feature. I moved JUC, specific validation logic into a validator. JUC, mapping logic into a mapper. JUC, related tests into focused test classes. JUC, unrelated cleanup into follow-up tasks. I also documented the future refactoring plan, so the broader cleanup would not be forgotten. Result. The feature was delivered on time. The code improved in the area we touched. The team avoided unnecessary regression risk while still making progress on technical debt. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows column, technical compromise, incremental refactoring, delivery awareness, risk management, maintainability improvement, team alignment. Example 6. Compromising on caching strategy situation. In one application, we had a read-heavy API that returned reference data used by multiple screens. Some team members wanted to add caching quickly to improve performance. Others were concerned about stale data and cache invalidation. Task. I needed to help the team choose a caching approach that improved performance without creating data correctness problems. Action. I first agreed that caching could help because the API was read-heavy. But I also understood the concern about stale data. We discussed key questions. Catch. How long should data stay cached? Catch. What should trigger invalidation? Can users tolerate stale data? Catch. Is the data user-specific or global? Catch. What happens if refresh fails? Catch. How do we monitor cache hit and miss rates? How do we test expiry? I proposed a compromise. We would cache only stable reference data in the first version. The design included clear TTL, clear no sensitive user-specific data, cache hit and miss logging, fallback behavior, tests for cache expiry, documentation of stale data expectations, monitoring after release. We would not cache dynamic user-specific data until we had clearer requirements. Result. The API performance improved. The team avoided stale data issues because the cache scope was limited. The caching pattern became a safer starting point for future improvements. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows check, performance improvement, data correctness awareness, technical compromise, limited scope, production thinking, safe caching strategy. Example 7. Compromising on QA testing scope before release situation. In one release, QA had limited time to test a backend feature because development finished later than expected. The feature was important, and the team wanted to avoid delaying the release. At the same time, skipping testing completely was not acceptable. Task. I needed to help define a practical testing compromise that covered the highest risk areas. Action. I worked with QA to identify critical test scenarios. The full testing scope included many combinations, but the highest risk areas were copy path, authorization, validation errors, missing required fields, role-based access, regression impact on related APIs, error response format, smoke test after deployment. I suggested a risk-based testing approach. For the current release, QA would focus on core happy path, critical validation errors, role-based access, one regression flow, deployment smoke test. Lower risk combinations would be tested in a follow-up regression cycle. I also helped by providing test data, sample API requests, expected responses, and logs to speed up QA work. Result. QA completed the most important testing before release. The feature was released safely. The team learned to involve QA earlier in future stories to avoid last-minute testing pressure. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows. Check. Quality awareness. Check. Risk-based compromise. Check. QA collaboration. Check. Delivery pressure handling. Check. Testing prioritization. Check. Practical support. Example 8. Compromising on product scope change situation. In one sprint, the product owner requested an additional feature for a report after development had already started. The request was valuable, but it affected backend calculation logic, front-end display, QA test data, and regression testing. The team was concerned that adding the full request would put the sprint goal at risk. Task. I needed to help find a compromise that respected the business need while protecting delivery quality. Action. I first listened to the product owner's reason for the request. They explained that one part of the feature would provide immediate value to business users. Then I explained the technical impact of adding everything at once. The full request affected. Check. Calculation rules, date filtering, time zone behavior, database query, API response, front-end UI, QA test data, regression testing. I proposed a compromise. We would include the highest value part in the current sprint and move the rest to a follow-up story. The current sprint would include core report calculation, one additional business field, updated API response, basic QA validation. The next sprint would include advanced filters, export formatting, additional edge cases, extended regression testing. Result. The product owner agreed. The business received the most valuable part quickly. The team avoided overloading the sprint and delivered the feature with better quality. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows. Check. Business empathy, scope negotiation, technical impact explanation, Agile compromise, delivery protection, stakeholder alignment. Best short answer version. If you need a short interview answer, you can say, in one sprint, our team was building a customer search API. The product owner wanted basic search, filters, pagination, sorting, export functionality, and role-based access in the first release. The timeline was tight, and implementing everything in one sprint would have created quality and testing risk. I reviewed the scope with the product owner, QA, and front-end developer. I explained that the core API, pagination, sorting, validation, and authorization were important for the first release, but export and advanced filters required more development and testing. So I proposed a compromise. Deliver the core search API first, including status filter, pagination, sorting, role-based access, validation, and error handling. Then we would move export and advanced filters into a follow-up story. As a result, the first version was delivered on time with good quality. The business received a usable feature, and the remaining enhancements were clearly planned for the next sprint. Common mistakes to avoid. 1. Making compromise sound like giving up. Bad answer. I just agreed with them because I did not want conflict. Better answer. I adjusted the scope while protecting the most important business and technical goals. 2. Ignoring quality. Bad answer. We compromised by skipping testing. Better answer. We compromised by using risk-based testing and still covered the most critical scenarios. 3. Only thinking about your side. Bad answer. I wanted my technical solution, but they wanted speed. Better answer. I understood the business need and proposed a phased approach that balanced speed and quality. 4. No clear result. Bad answer. We found a middle ground. Better answer. We delivered the core feature on time and planned the remaining work for the next sprint. 5. Compromising on something unsafe. Bad answer. We compromised by removing authorization checks. Better answer. Never compromise on security, compliance, data integrity, or production safety. Compromise on scope, timeline, rollout, or implementation phase. Best practices for answering this question. Use the STAR method. Explain both sides fairly. Show why compromise was needed. Protect the most important goal. Avoid blame. Explain trade-offs. Propose practical options. Keep quality and safety intact. Show alignment. End with a positive result. What interviewers are looking for. Interviewers want to see whether you can check, collaborate with others, balance competing priorities, communicate trade-offs, adjust your approach, protect quality, avoid unnecessary conflict, support team decisions, deliver practical outcomes. For senior roles, they also want to see stakeholder management, scope negotiation, technical judgment, risk-based decision-making, business awareness, delivery leadership, maturity under pressure. Strong words to use in your answer. You can use words like check, balanced, adjusted, aligned, negotiated, prioritized, phased, protected quality, reduced risk, agreed on scope, supported delivery, preserved safety, created follow-up plan. Example: I compromised by splitting the work into phases, delivering the highest value functionality first, protecting quality and security, and creating a clear follow-up plan for the remaining enhancements. Good compromise topics you can use. Depending on your experience, you can talk about reducing sprint scope, quick fix now and refactor later, front-end friendly DTO while protecting back-end model, safer deployment timing, incremental refactoring, limited caching strategy, risk-based QA testing, product scope change, feature flag rollout, library solution with wrapper, MVP first, and enhancements later, check, temporary workaround with cleanup task, check, phased migration, check, smaller pull requests now and cleanup later, check, core API first and export later. Final summary. Tell me about a time you had to compromise is an important interview question, because software development often requires balancing business needs, technical quality, timelines, and team priorities. The best answer should include what the disagreement or trade-off was, why both sides had valid points, what compromise you proposed, how you protected the most important goals, how you communicated the decision, what result improved. What examples include check, scope reduction, hotfix now and refactor later, front-end back-end DTO compromise, deployment timing compromise, incremental refactoring, limited caching strategy, risk-based QA testing, product scope split. The strongest answers show maturity, flexibility, communication, business awareness, technical judgment, and team-first thinking.